They laughed when the janitor stepped near the executive conference table. "Translate this," someone said, voice sharp with amusement. "And my salary is yours." A few executives snickered as the foreign contract was waved inches from his chest. He didn't flinch. He simply took the pages, nodded once, and began reading. They had no idea the room was about to turn on them. "By the way, where are you watching from? Tell me in the comments below. Because what's unfolding here isn't about language. It's about power, pretending not to see what's right in front of it." The silence didn't come all at once. It crept in, word by word, as his calm voice stripped the laughter from the room. Pens stopped moving. Smiles stiffened. A deal worth billions suddenly felt fragile, like glass under pressure. They still didn't know why. They only knew something had shifted, and it scared them. He handed the pages back without ceremony, stepped away from the table, and returned to the place they believed he belonged. A mop bucket waited near the wall, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the faint smell of polish and stale coffee hanging in the air. That calm wasn't weakness. It was practiced. Ryan Iqbal had learned long ago that reacting gave power away. Standing still, listening, letting others reveal themselves, that was how you survived. As a single father, as a man working nights, as someone who understood how quickly dignity could be taken and how quietly it had to be reclaimed. The elevator doors closed behind him, sealing off the boardroom's murmurs. His reflection stared back from the brushed steel, tired eyes, uniform creased at the shoulders, hands roughened by chemicals and hours of unseen work. He exhaled slowly, letting the tension drain just enough to function. Down in the service corridor, the building sounded different. No applause of voices, just humming vents, distant printers, the soft squeak of his cart's wheels. This was where he existed, where power never looked. At home, later that night, the apartment was small but warm. A single lamp glowed over the kitchen table where his daughter's homework lay spread out. Language worksheets, foreign phrases circled in red pen. He set his keys down carefully so the sound wouldn't wake her, then paused, listening to her breathing through the cracked bedroom door. Steady. Safe. He washed his hands, scrubbing away the day but not the words he'd read. They replayed in his mind automatically, clauses folding open, implications lining up. Old instincts he never invited anymore had answered anyway. The next morning, he returned before sunrise. Polished floors reflected marble columns and framed art that cost more than his car. Executives drifted in with tailored suits and phones pressed to their ears, already complaining. None of them noticed him correcting a misfiled folder outside the legal office. None of them saw the brief pause as he read a header and frowned. Inside the glass-walled conference room, Evelyn Hartmore paced, heels clicking with impatience. Deadlines were tightening. Investors were restless. The foreign partner was demanding clarity no one seemed able to provide. Money had always fixed problems before. Today, it wasn't working. Rayan moved on, mopping carefully around the room's edges, eyes lowered, ears open. He heard fragments, misinterpretations, assumptions, confidence built on sand. Each mistake stacked quietly on the next. By midday, frustration boiled over. Laughter returned, sharper this time, aimed downward. The challenge resurfaced, louder, crueler, meant to remind everyone who mattered and who didn't. Witnesses gathered. Phones stayed out of pockets, but attention sharpened. He felt it then, the familiar tightening in his chest that had nothing to do with fear. It was resolve. The kind that came from knowing what was at stake wasn't pride, but rent, school fees, a child's future balanced on fragile ground. When the contract was thrust toward him again, he didn't hesitate. Not because he wanted to prove them wrong, because he couldn't afford not to. The contract was still warm from their hands when he returned it, the paper whispering softly as it slid back across the polished table. No one thanked him. No one asked questions yet. The moment fractured into awkward silence, then snapped back into motion as if nothing important had happened. Chairs scraped. Voices rose. He stepped away, card in hand, already being erased. He pushed through the service door and into the stairwell, the echo of laughter chasing him down concrete steps. His phone buzzed in his pocket. One message, from the school. He stopped on the landing, thumb hovering before opening it, already bracing. Another reminder about the language assessment. Another polite warning about scholarships being competitive. Another countdown he couldn't slow. At the bottom floor, the building exhaled into the underground. Parking lot. Engines idled, tires hissed over concrete. He wiped his hands on a rag and kept moving. Work first, panic later. That had always been the rule. Upstairs, the boardroom buzzed with forced confidence. Evelyn Hartmore stood at the head of the table, chin lifted, voice clipped. She dismissed concerns with practiced ease, brushing past the unease that had crept in when the janitor spoke. She told herself it meant nothing. It had to mean nothing. Expertise came with titles, not uniforms. By noon, legal sent another memo, vague, inconclusive. The foreign partner wanted confirmation in writing. Numbers were recalculated. Assumptions doubled down on. Every solution involved more money, more pressure, more denial. No one noticed the man replacing trash liners along the wall, his eyes flicking to the projected document each time it changed. He paused once, longer than necessary, staring at a clause near the bottom. A subtle phrasing. A cultural marker disguised as formality. His jaw tightened. He moved on without comment, the hum of the projector filling the room like static. During lunch, he sat alone in the break room, peeling an orange slowly. Juice stung a small cut on his thumb. He didn't react. Across from him, a security guard complained about management. He listened, nodding, offering nothing. Listening was safer. His phone buzzed again. This time it was his daughter. A photo of her worksheet. A question mark drawn in the margin. He typed back a quick explanation, careful not to overdo it. Encouraging. Calm. He added a smile emoji she liked. Then he stared at the screen a moment longer than necessary before slipping it away. If you're still with this story, make sure you subscribe. Because what's coming isn't loud, but it's precise, and moments like this don't announce themselves twice. By mid-afternoon, tension bled into the hallways. Assistants whispered. Someone cried quietly in a stairwell. The deal clock ticked louder with every unanswered email. Evelyn snapped at an analyst for using the wrong term, then stormed out to take a call. Her heels echoed sharp and fast, a sound that usually meant control. Today, it sounded thin. He worked through it all, steady hands, measured steps, a spilled coffee, a jammed printer. Small problems he fixed without acknowledgement. Each one grounded him. Each one reminded him he still knew how to solve things, even if no one asked him to. Late in the day, the foreign partner's response arrived, short, formal, unforgiving, a deadline, 48 hours, no extensions. The room froze. Power failed them, just for a second. Then panic surged. Evelyn returned, eyes scanning faces, looking for certainty. She didn't find it. She found fear instead. Advisors talked over each other. Legal hedged, consultants promised to circle back. Money hovered uselessly in the air, unable to buy clarity. That was when someone laughed again. Nervous this time. The joke resurfaced, sharper, meant to cut tension, The janitor, the salary, the impossible dare. Eyes drifted toward the wall where he stood, mop resting against his leg. He felt the shift before he saw it. The room tilting, attention bending his way. He straightened slowly, not in defiance, but readiness. His heartbeat stayed even. This wasn't new. Pressure had a familiar shape. Evelyn met his gaze, irritation flaring. She waved the contract once more, voice edged with impatience. The challenge hung there, no longer playful. It was desperate now. He didn't speak yet, he didn't need to. He simply stepped forward, careful, deliberate, as if crossing an invisible line. The boardroom felt quiet again, this time without laughter. Somewhere deep inside, the part of him he'd buried for years stirred fully awake. The message sat on his phone like a held breath. High priority. No sender name. Just a conference room number and a time that cut straight through his shift. He finished wiping down the last stretch of marble. Near the lobby, straightened the caution sign and checked the clock. 3 minutes. As he rode the service elevator up, the hum felt louder than usual, vibrating through his boots. Floors ticked by. Each number pulled him closer to a world that usually existed behind glass and security codes. When the doors opened, the air changed. Cooler, sharper, perfumed with money and urgency. The conference room was already full. Not the same faces as before, new ones. Consultants with expensive laptops, advisors with tailored restraint. Evelyn Hartmore stood at the head of the table, posture rigid, expression controlled but tight around the eyes. The laughter from yesterday was gone. In its place sat something colder. She didn't offer him a seat. "We need to clear something up," she said, gesturing to the screen where the contract glowed, annotated and color-coded. "What you said yesterday caused confusion." Confusion, not error, not mistake. He noted that carefully. The legal counsel shifted, avoiding eye contact. Others studied him openly now, curiosity edged with calculation. He felt it settle over his shoulders, that familiar weight of being assessed for usefulness rather than worth. "I didn't intend to confuse anyone," he replied. "I intended to prevent a problem." Evelyn's smile was thin. "You're a janitor. Your intentions aren't part of this process." A few heads nodded reflexively, order reasserting itself. She clicked to the next slide. "Our experts reviewed the clause overnight. They disagree with your interpretation." He leaned back slightly, hands resting at his sides. "That's fine." Her eyes narrowed. "Fine?" "Yes," he said evenly. "Disagreement doesn't change the language." A murmur rippled through the room. One consultant frowned, scrolling quickly. Another tapped a pen against the table, too fast to be casual. Evelyn stepped closer. "Do you understand how inappropriate it is for you to insert yourself into executive matters?" He met her gaze without raising his chin. "I understand the document." The room went still again. Not shocked this time. Alert. She straightened, choosing a different angle. "Let's assume for a moment that you're right. Why didn't our legal team catch it?" He paused. Not for effect, for precision. Because they were looking at translation as conversion, not negotiation. This document wasn't written to be understood, it was written to be misread. That landed harder. The legal counsel stiffened, color rising in his neck. One consultant whispered something under her breath. Evelyn exhaled sharply. "And you expect us to believe you know this because—" "What? You read a lot?" He thought of long nights under flickering lights, of maps and margins, of learning how power hid behind words. He thought of a life he no longer spoke about. "Because I've seen it before." The room buzzed now, tension rising like static. She lifted a hand. Enough. This ends here. She turned to security. Escort him out. The guard hesitated, not out of defiance, out of uncertainty. At that moment, the screen flickered. A new message populated the shared inbox, projected large for everyone to see. An email from the foreign partner. Subject line urgent, the body short. They were invoking penalties. Immediately. Panic cracked through the room. Voices overlapped. Phones came out. Someone cursed openly. Evelyn stared at the screen, then slowly turned back toward him. "What does it say?" she demanded. He didn't answer right away. He watched the shift happen in real time, the way authority bent under pressure, the way desperation peeled back pride. "It says," he replied calmly, "that you've already accepted liability." The guard stepped back. For the first time, Evelyn looked unsure. Not defeated, not humbled, but aware she was standing on ground she didn't fully understand. "Sit," she said. He didn't. "Move." "I'm asking you," she corrected. He took the chair then, the scrape loud in the silence. Every eye fixed on him now, not as a joke, not as background, but as a variable they could no longer ignore. Outside, through the glass, the city moved on. Inside, a balance had tipped. He felt it in his chest, steady and heavy. This wasn't victory, not yet. This was escalation. And he knew from experience that once power felt threatened, it didn't back down quietly. It tested, it pushed, it tried to remind you where you belonged. He folded his hands on the table, eyes on the contract, already seeing 3 moves ahead. The room waited, breath held, as if sensing that the next words spoken here would decide more than a deal. They would decide who was allowed to be heard. Morning came too fast. He felt it before he saw it, the thin light pressing through the blinds, the city already moving without him. His phone buzzed on the nightstand, vibrating twice before stopping. He lay still, for a moment, listening to his daughter's breathing from the next room, grounding himself in that steady rhythm before reaching for the screen. The message was short. From the school counselor, a reminder about the assessment results meeting scheduled for the afternoon. Polite language, careful phrasing, but he knew what it meant. Decisions were being made, futures weighed. He closed the message without replying and sat up, rubbing his face, letting the fatigue surface and pass. In the kitchen, he packed lunch with the same precision he used at work. Fruit sliced evenly, sandwich wrapped tight. Routine mattered. It kept panic from spilling over. When she shuffled in, hair messy, eyes half open, he smiled and handed her the bag. She asked if he'd help her practice later. He said yes without hesitation, even though he didn't know how the day would unfold. At the tower, the mood had shifted overnight. It wasn't obvious. No announcements, no apologies, just a subtle recalibration. People nodded when they passed him. One assistant thanked him for restocking supplies. The security guard from yesterday offered coffee. Small things, but they stacked. Attention lingered longer than before. Upstairs, doors closed. Meetings multiplied. He wasn't invited, but he heard enough through walls and vents to understand the shape of it. Legal was scrambling. Finance was recalculating exposure. Names of foreign agencies surfaced, spoken carefully. Evelyn's voice carried once, sharp but restrained. Control was being rebuilt, piece by piece. He focused on his tasks, moving through hallways meant to be invisible. The elevator dinged open to reveal a group of consultants mid-argument. They fell quiet when they saw him, then awkwardly stepped aside. He nodded and continued mopping. The floor reflected their uncertainty back at them. Near noon, his phone buzzed again. This time, it was from the school. He stepped into a stairwell before answering. The counselor's voice was calm, professional, but edged with concern. His daughter's language scores were strong, but the evaluation committee had questions, access, resources, support at home. He closed his eyes briefly. He answered simply, truthfully, refusing to apologize for circumstances he couldn't change. When the call ended, he stayed there a moment longer, hand resting against the cool concrete wall. The building vibrated faintly with activity above and below. Two worlds stacked on top of each other, rarely touching. He existed in the seam between them. Back in the office corridors, tension peaked again. An email arrived from the foreign partner. A clarification request. Subtle. Dangerous. Evelyn gathered her inner circle. Voices rose. Someone suggested buying more time. Someone else suggested walking away. Neither option felt solid. Money hovered uselessly again. He replaced a trash liner near the conference room and caught sight of the email on a screen. Just a glimpse. Enough. His jaw tightened. The phrasing was deliberate. A test. He finished his task and moved on, heart steady, mind already parsing implications. Mid-afternoon, he left early for the school meeting. The building released him without ceremony. Outside, traffic crawled. He checked the time twice, then once more. Being late wasn't an option today. The school office smelled faintly of disinfectant and paper. He sat across from the counselor, hands folded, posture respectful but firm. She spoke about potential, about opportunities that required commitment. She asked about his availability, his support system, his resources. He answered without defensiveness, without embellishment. He spoke about effort, about consistency, about showing up. When his daughter joined them, eyes searching his face, he met her gaze and nodded. Whatever happened, they would handle it together. The counselor softened slightly. Notes were taken. Nothing was decided yet. Waiting stretched again. By the time he returned to the tower that evening, dusk had settled. The lights inside burned brighter, sharper. He clocked in, resumed his route. On the executive floor, voices cut through glass walls. Evelyn stood near the window, phone pressed to her ear, shoulders tense. She glanced out once, eyes catching his reflection. Something unreadable crossed her face before she turned away. He finished his rounds methodically. The day had taken its toll, but resolve remained intact. Pressure didn't scare him, it clarified. Tomorrow would demand more, from all of them. As he pushed his cart down the corridor, the building hummed, alive with unresolved decisions. Above, deals teetered. Below, futures waited. He moved between them, unseen but necessary, carrying weight no one had assigned him, ready to bear it anyway. The next morning began with urgency baked into the air. Even before he clocked in, he could feel it. Emails firing off like flares. Footsteps moving faster. Voices pitched just a little too high. The tower wasn't panicking yet. It was pretending not to. He pushed his cart through the lobby, the marble cold under his boots, and nodded at the receptionist. She nodded back, distracted, fingers flying over her keyboard. Somewhere above, a meeting was already running late. He took the service elevator up, listening as it rattled past floors where power gathered and dissolved in cycles. On the executive level, the conference room doors were closed, blinds drawn. Voices leaked anyway. Legal jargon collided with financial forecasts. He parked his cart near the wall and began wiping down a side table. Movements slow, unremarkable. The projector inside buzzed, paused, buzzed again. Frustration spiked. Evelyn's voice cut through the noise, sharper than the rest. She was asking for certainty. She wasn't getting it. Advisors spoke in circles, careful not to own the risk. Someone mentioned the janitor again, half joke, half memory. Laughter didn't follow this time. Just an uncomfortable silence. He finished the table and moved toward the trash bins, eyes flicking once to the screen through the glass. The document was back up, annotated now, but the core issue remained untouched. The same clause. The same trap. They were circling it without stepping inside. He felt the familiar pull then. Not urgency, but responsibility. It wasn't his job. It had never been his job. But consequences didn't care about job descriptions. They landed where they landed. During break, he sat alone again, coffee steaming in a chipped mug. His phone rested beside it, screen dark. He thought about the school meeting, the counselor's careful words, the way opportunity always came with conditions. He thought about how easily things could slip out of reach if the wrong decision was made upstairs. If you're finding yourself rooting for someone who was never supposed to matter, go ahead and subscribe. Because this is the part where quiet effort starts to outweigh loud authority. Back on the floor, the meeting spilled out into the hallway. Faces were tight. Someone swore under their breath. Evelyn emerged last, heels stopping short when she saw him. For a moment, neither spoke. Power hovered, uncertain of itself. She asked him to come inside, not loudly, not kindly either, just direct. He nodded once and followed, leaving the cart by the door. Inside, the room felt smaller than before. The table was cluttered with papers, cups, discarded confidence. She gestured to the screen, asked him to look again. This time, it wasn't a challenge. It was a request wrapped in pride. He stepped closer, reading silently. He didn't rush. He didn't soften the truth. He pointed to the clause, then another, explaining how one unlocked the other, how intent mattered more than translation, how the partner was positioning for leverage, not partnership. No one interrupted. They leaned in, listening. Notes were taken. The air shifted, not dramatically, but decisively. Solutions formed that didn't involve throwing money at the problem. They involved understanding it. Evelyn watched him carefully now. She asked where he learned this. He shrugged again. "Long time ago," he said. It was enough. By the end of the hour, the path forward was clearer. Not easy, not guaranteed, but real. The meeting adjourned without ceremony. People filed out quieter than they'd entered. She told him to take the rest of the day. He shook his head. There was still work to do. Floors didn't clean themselves. She didn't argue. As he returned to his cart, the weight in his chest eased slightly. Not because he'd been acknowledged, but because he'd done what needed doing. That had always been the metric that mattered. That evening, as he wiped down the last corridor, his phone buzzed. A message from the school. Short, encouraging. Not a decision yet, but progress. He closed his eyes briefly, letting relief wash through him before it could turn into hope. Upstairs, Evelyn stayed late, drafting emails with more care than before. Downstairs, he finished his shift, body tired but steady. The tower settled into night again, holding the echo of choices made and deferred. Somewhere between the executive floor and the service hallway, the balance continued to shift, quietly, deliberately, toward something more honest. By the following morning, the building no longer pretended everything was normal. It moved like a body fighting off infection, tight, alert, reactive. Emails stacked faster than they could be answered. Assistants hovered near glass walls, whispering updates that carried no comfort. The foreign partner had responded overnight, their tone sharpened, polite words now edged with pressure. He arrived early, earlier than usual, the sky still dark when he unlocked the service entrance. The air inside felt colder, heavier. Somewhere above, lights were already on. He pushed his cart forward, listening to the familiar echo of wheels on tile, letting routine anchor him before the day could tilt. On the executive floor, the conference room was open again. No blinds this time. Transparency as strategy. People gathered in clusters, laptops open, faces tight. Evelyn stood at the head of the table, posture rigid, eyes sharp. When she saw him, she hesitated, just a fraction of a second, then nodded. The meeting started without ceremony. The foreign partner's message was projected large, its phrasing deceptively calm. Requests for clarification, subtle reframing of obligations, a ticking clock embedded in courtesy. Advisors spoke first, circling, careful not to step where the ground might give way. Legal flagged risks, finance flagged costs, no one flagged intent. He worked along the wall, emptying bins, replacing liners, eyes flicking to the screen when no one noticed. The same pattern repeated itself. They were still reading the words, not the meaning behind them. Still assuming good faith because money, preferred it that way. Then the email thread updated live. A follow-up arrived, faster than expected. A condition added. The room stilled. Someone swore softly. Evelyn's jaw set. She looked around, measuring the silence, then looked at him. "Tell us," she said. Not a challenge, not a joke. A request made in front of everyone. He stepped forward, leaving the cart behind. The room watched openly now. No laughter, no smirks, just attention, sharp and exposed. He read the new line carefully, then nodded once. "They're closing the exit," he said, voice calm. "If you accept this phrasing, you assume responsibility for regulatory penalties they already expect. They're protected. You're not." A ripple moved through the room. Legal leaned in. Finance recalculated aloud. Evelyn asked how certain he was. He pointed to a cultural marker buried in the sentence, one most translators would ignore. He explained what it signaled, why it mattered, how often it had been used before. Questions came quickly now. He answered them just as quickly, never raising his voice, never hedging. He wasn't guessing, he was remembering. Patterns didn't forget themselves. The realization spread, slow but unstoppable. They weren't negotiating from equal ground, they never had been. The deal wasn't collapsing because of market forces, it was collapsing because of arrogance. Evelyn absorbed it all, face tight, eyes never leaving him. In that moment, authority shifted, not formally, not permanently, but enough. She asked him what he would do. He told her, direct, unembellished. It wouldn't save face, it would save them. The room buzzed as options rearranged themselves. Calls were placed. Language was revised. A response drafted with care instead of confidence. He stepped back as they worked, returning to the wall, invisible again by choice. An hour later, the message was sent. Silence followed, the waiting kind. No one spoke, no one laughed. The building seemed to hold its breath. When the reply came, it was slower this time, more cautious. Concessions embedded where certainty had been before. A path forward, narrower but real. Relief didn't explode. It seeped in, quiet and stunned. Someone exhaled loudly. Another laughed once, shaky. Evelyn closed her laptop and looked around the table. Then she looked at him. "This doesn't leave this room," she said. It wasn't a threat. It was protection, for herself as much as him. He nodded. He hadn't expected anything else. The meeting broke apart slowly, people drifting out with new weight on their shoulders. As he returned to his cart, a junior analyst stopped him, gratitude flickering across their face before embarrassment chased it away. He nodded and moved on. Later, alone in a hallway, Evelyn caught up to him. She thanked him. Brief, controlled, real enough. He accepted it without comment. By the end of his shift, the tower felt different. Not kinder, just more careful. He clocked out as usual, jacket zipped, body tired, mind steady. Outside, the city moved on, indifferent. He walked toward home, carrying no trophy, no promise, only the quiet certainty that when power failed, precision had held. The waiting stretched longer than the workday. He felt it in the way the city slowed after dusk, in the pause between footsteps on the sidewalk as he walked home. The deal wasn't finished. It hovered, unresolved, and that uncertainty clung to him like humidity. He unlocked his apartment, kicked off his shoes, and listened for movement before relaxing his shoulders. His daughter sat at the kitchen table, papers spread out, pencil tapping nervously. She looked up when he entered, eyes searching his face for answers he didn't yet have. He smiled anyway, set his bag down, and washed his hands. Some habits never broke. They steadied him. They worked through the worksheet together, line by line. She stumbled once, then corrected herself. Pride flickered across her face, brief but bright. He nodded, offering quiet encouragement. This was the part of his life that didn't involve power plays or leverage, just patience and presence. It mattered more than anything upstairs ever would. Later, when she went to bed, he sat alone at the table, phone in hand, rereading the latest email from the school. Still no decision. Still pending. He placed the phone face down and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence. It reminded him of server rooms long ago, of nights spent parsing information that could change lives if mishandled. He pushed the memory aside. That life was over. Or so he'd told himself. The next day at work, the tower buzzed with cautious optimism. The foreign partner had responded again, this time with softened language. Negotiations reopened. The crisis had paused, not ended. That distinction mattered. People moved with more care now, voices lower, steps measured. He resumed his route, cart rolling, smoothly, eyes scanning without appearing to. On the executive floor, Evelyn passed him in the hallway and nodded. No words, just acknowledgement. It was enough. Meetings continued behind glass. He caught fragments, revised terms, regulatory review, risk mitigation. His guidance had been absorbed, reshaped, institutionalized. It no longer needed him in the room. That was fine. He didn't need credit, he needed stability. Mid-morning, his phone buzzed again. The school this time, not an email, a call. He stepped into a quiet stairwell before answering. The counselor's voice sounded lighter now. The committee had reviewed everything. Scores, context, support. They wanted to move forward. Provisional acceptance. Conditions still applied, but the door was open. He thanked her, voice steady despite the surge in his chest. When the call ended, he rested his forehead briefly against the cool wall. Relief didn't explode either. It settled, deep and grounding. Back on the floor, the building seemed to breathe differently. Or maybe he did. He finished his tasks with renewed focus, wiping down surfaces that reflected a future slightly less fragile than yesterday's. Around noon, a meeting adjourned abruptly. Voices spilled into the hallway, animated now. Evelyn emerged with 2 board members in tow. Their expressions were lighter, guarded but hopeful. She caught his eye again and paused. "This isn't over," she said quietly, "but it's moving." He nodded. That's enough for now. She studied him a moment longer, then moved on. The board members followed, glancing back once with curiosity they didn't bother hiding. By afternoon, the tower's rhythm normalized. Crisis gave way to process. He worked through it, invisible again, exactly where he preferred to be. Invisibility, when chosen, was freedom. As his shift ended, he checked his phone one last time. A message from his daughter's teacher this time. A simple note of encouragement. He smiled, to himself, pocketing the device. Outside, the sun dipped low, casting long shadows between buildings. He walked home with an easy pace, shoulders lighter. The future wasn't secure, it never was. But it was possible. And possibility, he'd learned, was something you could build on. Behind him, the tower stood tall, glass catching the last light. Deals would be signed or broken there. Power would shift again. But for now, balance had been restored, however briefly. He opened his door, stepped inside, and closed it softly behind him. Tomorrow would come. He would meet it calmly as he always had. The calm didn't last. It never did. By the time he reached the tower the next evening, the air had tightened again, sharp with urgency that hadn't fully shown its face yet. He felt it before anyone said a word, the same way he used to feel shifts in tone long before orders changed. Experience had trained him to notice pressure before it broke things. The lobby screens flashed market, updates in muted colors. Numbers dipped, recovered, dipped again. Executives moved faster than usual, phones glued to their ears, expressions carefully neutral. He clocked in and pushed his cart forward, steady, unhurried, the contrast almost jarring. On the executive floor, voices were raised again, not panicked, controlled, clipped, but strained. The foreign partner had sent another message, not hostile, not friendly, strategic. They were testing the boundary they'd just found, probing to see how far it could bend. He cleaned along the perimeter of the conference room, the smell of disinfectant mixing with coffee and tension. The discussion inside circled a familiar argument. How much could be conceded without looking weak? Power was obsessed with appearances. It always had been. Evelyn stood near the window, arms crossed, listening as advisors debated. She caught his reflection in the glass and hesitated. This time, she didn't wait for the room to stall completely. "Give us a minute," she said, and the others filed out reluctantly. The door closed. The room fell quiet except for the low hum of the city outside. She turned to him. "They're reframing again." He nodded. "They will. They haven't lost enough yet." She studied him, irritation flickering beneath something closer to respect. "We can't keep reacting." "You don't have to," he replied. "You set the terms, but you have to mean them." She exhaled slowly, then gestured to the table. He stepped closer, reviewing the latest draft. His finger traced a single paragraph. He shook his head. "This is where they'll come back," he said. "Not because it's strong, because it looks harmless." She leaned in, reading more carefully now. "So we change it." "No," he said. "You anchor it." He explained, briefly, precisely, how to reposition the language so refusal would cost the other side more than agreement. How to use their own cultural expectations against their leverage without insulting them. It wasn't aggressive, it was firm. A line drawn quietly. Evelyn listened without interrupting. When he finished, she nodded once. "Drafted." He did, standing there, words forming with ease he didn't comment on. Years of experience compressed into a few clean sentences. When he handed it back, she didn't question it. Outside the room, the advisors were called back in. The revised language was presented. There was pushback at first, reflexive and cautious. Then understanding spread, slowly. The plan wasn't loud, it was correct. If you're watching this unfold and realizing how often the quiet people carry the real weight, go ahead and subscribe. Because stories like this don't show up where you expect them to. The response was sent before doubt could creep back in. Once again, the waiting began. Hours passed. He returned to his cart, finishing his route while the tower held its breath. Time stretched thin, every minute feeling longer than the last. He checked his phone once, nothing new, then put it away. Near the end of his shift, Evelyn approached him in the hallway. She didn't bother with formality this time. They accepted, she said, with conditions. But they accepted. He nodded, relief passing through him like a controlled release of pressure. Good. She hesitated. The board wants to know who you are. He met her gaze, calm as ever. They don't need to. A flicker of something crossed her face. Annoyance, maybe, or respect, sharpened by frustration. That may not be my choice anymore. He considered that, then shrugged lightly. It never really was. She watched him walk away, the weight of the tower still resting on his shoulders without his consent. At home that night, he told his daughter the good news about the school. Her smile was immediate, unguarded. She hugged him hard, arms tight around his waist. In that moment, nothing else mattered. Later, after she slept, he sat by the window, city lights blinking below. The deal was moving toward resolution. His daughter's future had opened another inch. But attention had shifted his way, and attention was dangerous in its own right. He knew the next phase wouldn't be about translation or contracts. It would be about visibility, about what happened when power realized it had leaned too heavily on someone it never bothered to see. He rested his hands on his knees, breathing steady, already preparing. The attention arrived before the announcement. He felt it in the pauses when he entered a room, in the way conversation stalled just a second too long before resuming. The tower hadn't said his name out loud yet, but it was thinking it. Power always did this, noticed only after necessity forced its hand. He clocked in that evening under brighter lights than usual. The lobby screens were no longer flashing red. Markets had steadied. The deal's outline had leaked just enough to calm investors. Relief moved through the building like a held breath finally released, but it didn't bring celebration. It brought scrutiny. On the executive floor, the boardroom was set differently. Chairs aligned with care. Water glasses filled evenly. This wasn't a crisis meeting. It was a reckoning disguised as routine. He parked his cart by the wall and began his work, though he knew he wouldn't finish the route tonight. Evelyn arrived last, composed, unreadable. Board members followed, voices low, expressions curious. They glanced at him openly now, no longer pretending he blended into the background. He felt the shift and let it pass through him without reaction. Calm was still his advantage. The meeting opened with summaries and confirmations. Numbers stabilized, risks mitigated, credit taken carefully, deliberately. Then one of the board members cleared their throat and asked the question that had been circling for days. Who caught the clause everyone else missed? Silence followed. It stretched, heavy and expectant. Evelyn didn't answer immediately. She looked at him, then back at the table. He did, she said simply. All eyes turned toward the wall, toward the uniform, toward the man they'd laughed at days earlier. The room recalibrated in real time, assumptions collapsing under their own weight. They asked him to step forward. Not demanded, asked. He did, leaving the cart behind once more. The space felt different now, less hostile, more uncertain. Power didn't know which face to wear yet. Questions came quickly. Where did he learn this? How long had he known? Why hadn't he said anything sooner? He answered only what mattered. He spoke about patterns, about language as leverage, about consequences of misreading intent. He didn't speak about titles or past positions. Those details stayed where they belonged, in the past. One board member pressed harder, skeptical. "You expect us to believe this comes from janitorial work?" He met the man's gaze, unoffended. "No," he said calmly. "I expect you to believe it because it's correct." A murmur rippled through the room. Some smiled despite themselves. Others bristled. Evelyn watched closely, saying nothing, allowing the moment to unfold without interference. They reviewed the revised contract again, this time with his explanations layered in. Each question led to another confirmation. The logic held. The strategy stood. What had felt accidental now looked deliberate. Competence had a way of doing that once it was seen clearly. By the end of the session, there was no denying his role in what had happened. They didn't applaud. They didn't congratulate. They acknowledged. For this room, that was seismic. One of the board members suggested formal recognition, a consulting role, compensation. Titles were floated carefully, like offerings that could be withdrawn if rejected too quickly. He listened without comment, weighing each word. "I'm not interested in changing my job," he said finally. "I'm interested in the work being done right." The answer unsettled them more than refusal would have. Power understood ambition. It didn't always understand restraint. Evelyn intervened then, redirecting the conversation, shelving decisions for later. The meeting adjourned with unresolved tension, humming beneath professional smiles. As the room emptied, she stayed behind. He returned to his cart, but she stopped him before he could leave. "You've made this impossible to ignore," she said quietly. "That wasn't the goal," he replied. "It never is," she said, watching him closely. "But it happens anyway." He nodded once. "Then we deal with it." She studied him for a long moment, then stepped aside. He continued down the corridor, the weight of visibility pressing in now. Invisibility had protected him. Exposure would test him. Downstairs, the building settled into night. He finished his tasks with deliberate care, aware of eyes following him where none had before. Respect and resentment mixed freely in those looks. Both were dangerous. When he clocked out, the city greeted him with cool air and distant sirens. He walked home slower than usual, thinking about offers he didn't want and responsibilities he couldn't avoid. Tomorrow would demand choices. Not about contracts or language, but about dignity and control. He'd stepped into the light once. Stepping back wouldn't be as simple. At home, his daughter slept soundly, unaware of boardrooms and leverage. He watched her for a moment before turning away, resolve settling in his chest. Whatever came next, it would happen on his terms. The next morning didn't bring clarity. It brought pressure, refined and sharpened overnight. He felt it as soon as he stepped into the tower, the way conversation stopped when he passed, then restarted in lower tones. Yesterday's acknowledgement had not settled anything. It had only shifted the battlefield. The board's interest had spread faster than expected. Emails had leaked. Questions multiplied. People who had never noticed him before now watched closely, trying to decide what he represented. A resource, a threat, or an inconvenience that should have stayed invisible. He pushed his cart forward anyway, grounding himself in motion. The smell of cleaner, the rhythmic squeak of wheels, the familiar resistance of doors that never quite opened smoothly. These were constants. Power was not. On the executive floor, Evelyn waited near the conference room, phone in hand, jaw tight. She nodded at him and fell into step beside him as he worked along the corridor. "They want to formalize it," she said quietly. "Advisory role, immediate." He didn't look up. "Because it's useful." "Because it's necessary," she corrected, then paused. "And because they're afraid of what it means if they don't." He stopped the cart and met her gaze. "That," Fear isn't my responsibility. No, she said, but it's mine. Inside the boardroom, preparations were underway for the final call with the foreign partner. The revised agreement had held, but one last point remained unresolved, a narrow clause tied to regulatory disclosure. If mishandled, it could undo everything. Legal was divided. Finance wanted speed, the board wanted certainty. He finished his task near the wall and stepped back, listening. The debate circled familiar ground, confidence eroding with every pass. They were close to overcorrecting now, trading arrogance for hesitation. Evelyn caught his eye across the room. She hesitated, then addressed the group. "We have one more option," she said, "and it doesn't involve guessing." Attention turned to him again, openly this time. No pretense left. The invitation was implicit. He stepped forward, posture calm, hands steady. He reviewed the clause carefully, reading beyond the words to the intent beneath. Them. The foreign partner wasn't pushing for advantage anymore. They were protecting themselves from future scrutiny. That distinction mattered. "This isn't leverage," he said. "It's insurance." Legal pushed back, citing precedent. He shook his head gently and explained how precedent shifted across jurisdictions, how this language would be interpreted under review, how rejecting it outright would raise red flags they couldn't afford. The room quieted as understanding spread. Solutions realigned. A counterproposal formed, one that addressed the concern without surrendering ground. It was precise, balanced, hard to argue with. Evelyn nodded slowly. "We send this." They did. The call followed shortly after. Screens lit up with unfamiliar faces, voices formal but less guarded than before. Negotiation resumed, controlled and deliberate. He stayed near the edge of the frame, listening, offering guidance only when needed. The dynamic had changed. They weren't scrambling now. They were steering. When the final terms were agreed upon, there was no celebration. Just a collective exhale. The deal was done. Not perfect, but solid. Jobs protected, damage contained, the crisis closed. The call ended. Silence filled the room again, different from before. He stepped back, already reaching for his cart, ready to return to the margins. One of the board members stopped him. "We owe you more than thanks." He met the man's gaze, expression steady. "Then do better next time," he said. "Pay attention sooner." A few people shifted uncomfortably. Evelyn didn't interrupt. She watched, thoughtful. After the room cleared, she approached him slowly. "You know this changes things," she said. "It already has," he replied. "They'll push," she warned. "Titles, visibility, control." He nodded. "Then I'll set limits." She studied him, then surprised herself by smiling faintly. "You're not what I expected." He returned the smile, brief and tired. "Neither is this place." As he returned to his cart, the building felt different again. Not lighter, just more honest. The illusion of effortless power had cracked, replaced by something closer to accountability. Word traveled fast. By the end of his shift, people stopped him to say thank you, to ask questions, to test boundaries. He kept his answers short, neutral, refusing to become a symbol. When he clocked out, the sky outside was streaked with fading light. He walked home through the city, feeling the weight of resolution settle into something manageable. At home, his daughter greeted him with a grin and a stack of papers. The acceptance letter had arrived. Official this time. Conditions listed. Opportunities real. He read it twice, then pulled her into a hug that lingered longer than usual. This was the victory that mattered. Everything else was noise. Later, after she slept, he sat alone by the window, city lights blinking below. The deal was done. The exposure complete. the consequences just beginning. He didn't know what tomorrow would demand, but he knew one thing with certainty: they wouldn't be laughing anymore. The laughter never came back. What replaced it was quieter and far more dangerous calculation. He felt it the moment he stepped into the tower the next evening, the way eyes tracked him openly now, no longer pretending he was part of the background. Respect had arrived, but it hadn't come alone. It brought expectation with it. He moved through the lobby as he always had, cart steady, pace unhurried. The marble floors reflected his outline just like they always had, but the reflection felt heavier now, layered with meaning he hadn't asked for. Conversations paused as he passed. Some people nodded. Others looked away, uncomfortable with how wrong they'd been. On the executive floor, the boardroom doors were open, sunlight cutting through glass walls and casting long shadows across the table. It looked less like a battlefield now, and more like a courtroom after verdict. Papers neatly stacked, voices controlled, outcomes decided. Evelyn stood near the window, phone in hand, posture composed. When she saw him, she didn't hesitate this time. "They want to speak with you," she said. "All of them." He nodded once. No surprise. This had been coming since the moment they'd stopped laughing. Inside, the board waited. No smiles, no hostility either, just intent. One of them gestured for him to sit. He remained standing. They spoke carefully, choosing words that sounded generous. Consulting arrangements, advisory oversight, compensation packages that dwarfed his annual salary. Phrases like untapped potential and mutual benefit floated through the room, polished and practiced. He listened without interrupting, hands resting lightly at his sides. When they finished, silence returned, expectant. "I appreciate the offer," he said calmly, "but I'm not interested." Louis, words landed harder than any accusation could have. A few of them exchanged looks. One leaned forward, brows drawn. "You don't want influence?" the man asked. "I don't want control," he replied, "and I don't want to be used as proof that this place fixes what it ignores." The room stiffened. The truth cut cleaner than anger. Evelyn watched closely, saying nothing. Another board member tried a different angle: prestige, legacy, impact. He listened again, then shook his head. "You already have impact," he said. "You just don't like where it comes from." Silence stretched. This time, no one rushed to fill it. Evelyn finally spoke. "He's right," she said evenly. "We didn't listen until we had to. That's on us." A few heads turned sharply toward her. Authority challenging itself always caused discomfort. She continued, "What he gave us wasn't just expertise. It was a mirror. If we turn him into an exception, we miss the point." The room absorbed that slowly. Resistance softened, not fully, but enough. The offers were withdrawn without ceremony, replaced by something simpler. One of them nodded. "Then what do you want?" He considered the question carefully. "Nothing new," he said. "Just space to do my job, and maybe a reminder to all of you that value doesn't announce itself." It wasn't a demand, it was a boundary. They accepted it because they had no choice. Power respected limits when they were drawn cleanly. The meeting ended without applause. No handshake tour, just quiet acknowledgement. As he turned to leave, Evelyn caught up to him in the hallway. "You could have taken everything," she said, "and lost what mattered," he replied. She studied him, something like humility settling into her expression. "I was wrong," she said, not loudly, not publicly, but sincerely. He nodded. That was enough. The rest of his shift passed differently, lighter somehow. People didn't hover anymore. The tension eased. He finished his work without interruption, moving through the building as he always had. Only now the silence felt earned instead of imposed. When he clocked out, the security guard held the door open for him without hesitation. "Good night," the man said, with genuine respect. "Good night," he replied, stepping into the cool air. At home, his daughter was sprawled on the living room floor, acceptance letter beside her, already planning out loud. He listened, smiling, letting her excitement fill the space the tower never could. Later, after she slept, he sat at the table, hands wrapped around a mug of tea. The world hadn't changed. Power still overlooked labor. Arrogance still mistook silence for ignorance. But one room had learned. One balance had shifted. And sometimes that was enough to start a ripple. Tomorrow he would return to work. Same uniform, same cart, same quiet resolve. They would remember him now, not as the janitor they laughed at, but as the man who taught them what value really looked like. The tower greeted him the same way it always had on his final shift of the week. Glass catching the morning light, doors sliding open without ceremony, the quiet assumption that work would be done without applause. That sameness mattered. It told him he hadn't broken anything by being seen. He'd only corrected a distortion. He clocked in, pushed his cart forward, and felt the building settle around him. Conversations flowed normally now, not hushed, not performative. People nodded as they passed, then continued on with their day. The calculation had faded, replaced by something closer to awareness. It wasn't kindness, it was recognition. On the executive floor, the boardroom sat empty, chairs tucked in, screens dark. The crisis had moved on, filed away under success. He cleaned the space thoroughly, slower than usual, letting the quiet linger. This room had held arrogance once, then fear, then clarity. Now it held nothing but echoes. Evelyn passed by midway through his work. She stopped, watching him for a moment before speaking. "The follow-up report went out this morning," she said. "Full transparency. Credit where it belongs." He nodded, not asking for details. "That's good." She hesitated. "You know, this won't be the last time something like this happens." "I know," he said. "That's why it matters how you handle the first one." She absorbed that, then smiled faintly. "You're still leaving at the end of the month?" "Yes." She nodded again, this time without surprise. "Then I hope wherever you go next, they listen sooner." He met her gaze. "So do I." She walked on, heels echoing once, then fading. The sound didn't feel sharp anymore, just human. He finished his route by noon. As he pushed the cart back toward storage, a junior employee stepped into his path, nervous but determined. They thanked him quietly, then asked how he stayed calm when everyone else panicked. He considered the question, then answered honestly, "Because panic is loud, calm lets you hear what matters." The employee nodded, thoughtful, and stepped aside. Another small ripple. When he clocked out for the last time that week, the motion felt ceremonial, even though no one announced it. He removed his gloves, folded them carefully, and placed them in his locker. The uniform would still be there tomorrow, but today marked an ending of sorts. Outside, the city moved as it always had. Cars honked. Sirens wailed in the distance. Life didn't pause for quiet victories. He walked home under a wide sky, breathing deeper than he had in days. At the apartment, his daughter met him at the door, backpack already on, excitement buzzing. The school orientation packet had arrived, dates, expectations. A future that felt tangible now. He read through it with her, explaining what he could, admitting when he didn't know. They would figure the rest out together. That evening. They cooked dinner side by side. She talked about languages she wanted to learn next, places she wanted to see. He listened, smiling, knowing the world would challenge her in ways he couldn't always shield her from. But he also knew she'd learned something important already, that worth wasn't assigned by status, and that quiet didn't mean weak. After she went to bed, he sat alone by the window one last time, city lights stretching endlessly below. The deal was finished, the exposure complete. The justice served not through revenge, but correction. He hadn't taken the money, he hadn't taken the title. He'd taken something better, control over his own dignity, and a future for the one person who mattered most. Somewhere in that tower, people would remember the day they laughed and the moment they stopped. Maybe it would change how they treated the next person pushing a cart past their office. Maybe it wouldn't. Change was never guaranteed, but stories like this existed for a reason. To remind people that power fails when it assumes too much, and that value often lives exactly where no one thinks to look. If you want another story like this, one that takes on arrogance, injustice, and quiet strength, ask me for the next story title. Subscribe and don't miss our next story. Single dad Janitor was asked to play piano as a dare, but what he played made. Even the CEO tear up. Trust me, you'll feel it. And tell me in the comments, what injustice should we tackle next?